Today on Absolute Anthem, we're taking a look back at all of the wonderful things BioWare shared with us throughout the course of the week, including some Interceptor cosmetics, as well as a big old post on the Anthem subreddit taking us inside their first Anthem closed alpha or technical test. We're going to be talking a lot about that today, but why don't we kick things off by taking a look at those glorious Interceptor cosmetic variants, starting with Angry Space Bee. Angry Space Bee is an art quality analyst on Anthem, and they've been rocking this sort of red and gunmetal gray Interceptor with a really fantastical helmet. So, you know, the armor color pattern, I'm digging it. I like the color combination here, but let's take a closer look at that helmet because that is a glorious and rather exotic helm we've got going on there. A bit of piping coming out of the back, these small rectangular slits for the eyelids. We even see some of that piping aesthetic in the front, and then we've got this huge top of the forehead that is just like this massive hard shell, almost looking as if it's reminiscent of some sort of a hard shell insect type creature, which fittingly, there is some artwork slapped on that hard shell spot on the helmet that looks very much like the Swarm Tyrant. I'm thinking that is 100% Swarm Tyrant art going on there. So maybe, just maybe, this helmet is unlocked or acquired as a drop from the Swarm Tyrant itself. We know the Swarm Tyrant is a big old boss inside of a stronghold. That would be some pretty awesome, unique gear to get from a stronghold boss completion, especially if it was actually themed after the boss itself. Really cool stuff, and we're going to see a couple things that I want you guys to focus on as we jump to the other two Interceptors today. Number one, just how much the helmet design can change, including the eyelids, and obviously the way in which color and materials are used to change the visual aesthetic of the armor as a whole. So let's go ahead and take a look at Jeff Ryans. Jeff Ryan is an audio programmer over at BioWare working on Anthem, and while the armor itself looks to be the same as what Angry Space Bee had in terms of its design of the individual armor pieces, we've obviously got some different textures and materials going on here. The undersuit is almost purple-blue in color with a more crimson color over the top of things, and we can see the helmet and some of the armor pieces have this sort of scaled plating on them. Now, it's hard to tell 100% the colors of everything because it looks like we're sitting inside of a volcano, but those scales, they are definitely what stand out here, coating the entire helmet, which appears to be more like a traditional Interceptor helmet like we saw on the base model. The eye slits are very similar, but we also see those scales on the chest piece. It looks like they're possibly on the hands as well as on the knee pad, so very cool bit of aesthetic there. It's not altering the entire suit in this case, but it's enough where it's definitely giving a little bit of its own personal taste, and I dig that. Last but not least, we got this from Mike Gamble yesterday for N7 Day. This is the N7 Interceptor. Again, completely different helmet design here, much more swept back. We can see the eyelids are a little bit more open towards the back of the helmet there. That soft red glow, bits of carbon fiber and very unique hard shell type materials on the armor itself. It just looks super good. And of course, the Mass Effect goodness going on there. I think a lot of people are going to be really excited about that. So it's cool to see the dev team sharing these. It's so out of the blue where all of a sudden they just were like, hey, go post your Interceptor. And now we've seen this, plus the Interceptor that was in the live stream, plus the Storm that was in the live stream that looked like the P-51 Mustang. So lots of cool stuff getting shared on the cosmetic front. But let's move forward and talk about that technical test post over on the Anthem subreddit. First and foremost, this is cool because it's a very unique level of transparency that you don't often get to see in big AAA game development. This is not them launching their first open alpha or their first open beta a month before launch and then giving feedback on things they're changing. This is them saying, hey, we're like just getting into alpha. These are the small types of things, the sort of everyday things that a lot of you probably don't think of as the people who play these games that we have to work on and refine and tweak. I think for the most part, as a consumer, even with all of the testing and early access titles that have been out, a lot of the time with AAA stuff, the most you test coming from beta is like very small tweaks, like, let's talk about ammo count and let's talk about player health. So we're getting to see glimpses of that in its earliest state here. What they did for this test was they brought in a small group of players, they gave them the first 3 missions of the game, and they capped them at level 5. They also encouraged them, despite it being a technical test, to give them some actual gameplay feedback in this very early iteration. So a lot of the things that they address here, or that were addressed here by the testers, are sort of like, we need to see more because not all the stuff's in the game. But let's start by talking about loot. So loot is obviously important in a game like Anthem, and the primary piece of feedback that they got from the testers was that loot drops weren't frequent enough and they were hard to spot out in the open world. So obviously the visual element of the game is something they can tweak to ensure that it's more clear. As it goes for frequency, they say that they're going to keep an eye on loot in future sessions and even have loot-focused sessions in the future. Now, I want to talk briefly about this because this is a conversation that I had like 6 months ago when I first started making content for Anthem, is just how difficult I think it is for any developer to tweak loot drops. It's a very big balancing act, and I think a lot of games take a long time to get it right. There's also a lot of considerations into how you want open world drops to be handled. Do you want a system that's very abundant, a la Diablo 3, but that only rarely drops the best loot? That's kind of what we see for a lot of games. You know, Destiny 2 is in that position where, like, just legendary stuff, basic stuff drops all the time, but getting that perfect roll is hard, and exotics are actually rather hard to come by. So they're going to have to decide on their own path there based on testing feedback, based on player feedback after launch. It's going to be one of those things that's just going to change. I don't think they're ever going to get it perfect at launch, and it's never going to be perfect because you can never please everyone. I've heard quite a few devs talk about the idea of building a feature until it's like polarizing. That's probably as good as it's going to get. In fact, David Vonderhaar talked quite a bit about this while they were balancing and while they continue to balance Blackout, saying that when something is sort of a 50-50 split of people who like it and people who don't like it, you're probably as good as it's going to get. You can tweak further, but that's probably the sweet spot because you'll never please everyone. There will always be a group of individuals who just feel they're getting cheated because of their personal skill or whatever reason. So if you can get half those people to be like, this is great, then you're off to a good start. So it's going to be cool to see how loot drops evolve. And of course, it's not just open world drops that are going to give us loot. They're going to have things from boss fights and from objectives, and that's all going to come together. And the feedback on that's going to continue to change as more of those things get integrated. One cool thing that they did point out, though, is that all of the loot you acquire in an instance of a mission will be available when you return to Fort Tarsus. So I imagine what they're saying here is even if you don't pick that loot up, don't worry, it'll show up at Fort Tarsus, similar to the Postmaster system inside of Destiny. So totally dig that. Moving on, they had some feedback from missions. The general consensus here from the testers was that they wanted more challenges sooner, the general difficulty of the game. What they've decided to do is another pass on their 3 difficulties, and also update the game to introduce different creatures earlier on and to use more of them. So this could be referring to the different enemy types that we might see with the Dominion and the Scars. This could also be referring to the wildlife that we've seen in the most recent live stream that, of course, can act as a threat to the player. They want to make sure that there's action and that it is challenging. From what we saw in the live stream, that difficulty looked reasonable enough, but I'm curious to see the game in a state where the players are leveled appropriately and they know what they're doing. And then let's see what middle difficulty looks like. Let's see what hard difficulty looks like. I like that the difficulty options are there. And to be honest, I personally have a lot of faith in BioWare when it comes to tweaking difficulty because of how well they've done in the past with Mass Effect. But this is a co-op game now. It is a different beast, and there's no doubt that there are greater challenges to balancing a game where multiple people can be jumping into the fray, and those player numbers can be altered 1, 2, 3, 4, and you've got a scale for that. So that's going to be something that is going to be very curious to see as it grows in the testing phase, and of course when we finally go hands-on with it. I'm under the realm of, much like I am with loot, where it's like give us less to start and then you can work your way up from there because giving us more is a bad thing. When it comes to challenge, if you've got like an easy mode where people who are going to struggle no matter what can go to and feel comfortable and have fun, then when it comes to like hard and very hard and even normal, start a little bit harder and then roll things back. Like if players have the tools, the majority of them will find a way, and otherwise you can always roll things back. But I think once something is super easy, you know, people could play through a huge chunk of your game in the first week because it's so easy and then miss out on that experience. And again, that is something that Destiny struggled with, The Division struggled with, Diablo struggled with. So I think that's very important to start harder and bring it down. But, you know, BioWare's, of course, got their own testing ideology. We'll leave that to them. They also talked quite a bit about progression. A lot of it is just them, you know, saying like this was super early. We don't have a lot of things in place, specifically tutorials for how you spend your skill points, how you use the Forge to equip gear, and et cetera, essentially, right? So those are all things they're going to add in the game as they introduce new tutorials and refine those tutorials. However, players did ask to have the amount of time they can be airborne extended. So essentially reduce the amount of heat or increase the amount of heat it takes to lock down your flight mechanics. BioWare's response to it in this case was, that is a system that is tied to progression. We already know this. As you progress your pilot, you'll actually unlock abilities that allow you to fly longer before your systems overheat, but it was not available in the closed alpha. So we know that that stuff becomes available currently, at least in the game, in this build beyond level 5. So that's something that they're going to test more in future builds by adding additional levels and potentially giving players that perk. They also talked a lot about playing with friends and how there's just a lot of work they still need to do on grouping up, knowing when a friend is in the group with you, so adding notifications for people leaving and joining, doing some team makeup tutorials, you know, adding things like an add kick leave feature. These are things they want to have in place. And just in general, iterating on the UI to ensure that people understand how they play with their friends, when they're actually playing with their friends, and, you know, how all of that stuff works. So those are, again, super early development things, and I think it's just really cool to see them toiling away on that. This is, I think, super healthy for the relationship between developers and consumers, and I think BioWare is in a unique position because like basically their main outlet for this stuff is Reddit right now, and the Reddit's actually relatively small, 32,000 subscribers. I like that though, and I've liked making content for Anthem because of that smaller community. There's less of people just throwing shit at the fan because they don't like the way it looks right now, and there's more people who are interested in seeing the game grow and seeing the process of development, who seem to have a better understanding that the game is months out from release. This isn't a case where it's like the Fallout 76 beta and the game releases in 2 weeks and everything is really, really rough. This is a case of, no, the game is months away from release, and this is really how AAA games come together. It's all that final tuning that comes down to that first demo, any beta testing they might end up doing for the public, and then that final release window. So if you show up to my videos or to any video from anyone, whether it's Eric's or Rick Kakis or Anthem Universe, I don't care who it is, and you add to the conversation for gameplay discussions, theory crafting, speculation, and you do it in a positive and open-minded way, thank you for being an awesome member of this game's community. We need more people like that. We need more conversation that can be created and added to and fueled like that. Be the person who does the and thing and adds to the conversation rather than being the person who just says but. Because at the end of the day, it's not fun to have a conversation with the person who says but. It's way more fun to have a conversation with the person who says and creates another layer on top of that discussion or that argument or whatever might be happening in that conversation. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you one more time before the week is over to take a look at the Ranger and all of its abilities and systems. As always, be good to one another. Be great to one another, because at the end of the day, this is all we got.